Welcome back to Taiwan versus the world. Today we will start with an in-depth conversation about the place of India in our part of the world, how it balances its strategic interests with non-alignment, and what this means for Taiwan and its partners. Then we will explore the reasons why it would not be possible or even suitable for the United States to relocate the chips industry from Taiwan to its own territory. Let's start now with two high-level guests for a conversation on India. Today we are going to talk about India, of course, a major actor in the region and an extremely important country for Taiwan. We are speaking with Shay Khatiri and Michael Mazza. Michael and Shay, hello.
Hello, good evening, good morning.
I don't know what time it is there, but good time.
I think the three of us are on very different parts of the world, but we managed to coordinate, so that's already a good effort. If I can ask both of you to introduce yourself, maybe Shay first.
I'm a senior fellow and vice president of development at the Yorktown Institute. I've been working my areas of expertise are mostly on Europe and the Middle East, but I've been working with Mike for quite a while. And because of the interactions that those regions have with Asia, I'm always interested in dynamics in Asia as well as India.
Yeah, so I'm Mike Mazza. I'm a senior director for research at the Institute for Indo-Pacific Security. Julian, some of your listeners may be familiar with our predecessor, which was the Project 2049 Institute. We changed our name about 6 months ago now. Most of my time is spent on security issues, surrounding the Taiwan Strait, but I also research broader issues of U.S. strategy and U.S. alliances in the Indo-Pacific.
Thank you. And of course, India is a country that is very difficult to understand for people who are neither in India or having a special interest in it. It's a country that has a very strong non-aligned ethos, but at the same time interact with great powers as well. So, of course, for Taiwan in particular, it's a country that has a that receives a growing attention. And you both just co-authored a paper called India is a situational partner, not an ally. So before we go in details about it, what do you mean by situational partner?
I think what we mean by that is that India is not currently and is unlikely to be an ally like we have alliances with countries like Japan or the United Kingdom, where we have very close alignments of both values and interests and worldviews, and can expect to be able to rely on each other in a wide variety of circumstances. I think the overlap in interests and values and worldview between the United States and India is much narrower. That overlap does allow for cooperation at times and meaningful cooperation, but there are going to be many circumstances in which India and the United States are not reliable partners for each other, and so that's what we mean by India as a situational partner, right? There are going to be circumstances, specific situations in which we can work closely together, but many others in which we'll find that kind of cooperation difficult.
Think about how not every one of them, but most of U.S. allies or the U.S. alliance system is born out of World War II. This is a very specific time. A country like Germany or Japan has just been defeated by the United States. A country like United Kingdom or France was a wartime ally, but all of these countries are set up to be liberal democracies at a specific time for a specific purpose that they become our allies. Japan, for instance, we decided to provide its security so it would not have a military. This is different with India, which is a very large country. It has a very proud political culture, and our history with India has evolved as opposed to one moment in history that completely changed the direction of international relations. Our relationship with India has evolved out of many difficulties that still exist in memory, and many of them are the fault of the United States. Nonetheless, these have pushed the direction of Indian foreign policy culture in a certain direction that uh, those shared values that we have with most of our allies just do not exist between us and India. It's a very different understanding. And the most important one of them is that I mentioned they are very proud, they have a very proud culture of foreign policy. And that is not so for a country like Germany, for instance, that is happy to forego its foreign policy pride, not to have a military. So we would provide it for them, for us to be the security provider in the region. That is not India. India wants itself to be the security provider, and that puts us at a major conflict with India.
All right, this is very, very interesting, and you describe that very well also in the article, the many reasons why, the many obstacles that lie between India and the United States in terms of entering an alliance, not only, as you said, Shay, because of India's pride and vision, but also because of past relationships, such as, for example, United States working with Pakistan. So all in all, it almost sounds like it's already good if the two countries manage to work on a certain number of visions, such as China or Indo-Pacific, considering the many obstacles that exist, right?
There are many areas of cooperation with India, as you mentioned. At the end of the day, one key component of a partnership or an alliance is a shared sense of threat. India and the United States both have, in our immediate thinking about Asia, we have a shared interest, which is deterring China. That is undeniable. And because of that, of course, and other issues, more minor issues, there's a lot to do with India. However, the long-term prospect of an alliance is a problem. Again, immediate threat, deterring China, maintaining the security in the Indo-Pacific, we're mostly aligned. So yes, there is a lot to do.
Yeah, I would add to that. You're right that the relationship has come a long way, and that's worth celebrating. Both countries, as we wrote in this article, have reasons to distrust the other. And the fact that we've pushed past that leaders in both countries have spent political capital to push past some of those issues is something to be celebrated and welcomed, right? India is now the largest country in the world by population. So, top five economy. It continues to have substantial economic growth in the way that China doesn't. This is a country we're going to be engaging with, in a serious way, and which is going to affect the sort of international environment in ways it has not done in the past. I think what Shay and I would argue is that while it's right to celebrate and recognize advancements in the relationship, and it's right to work together to counter China to the extent that we can, we also need to be clear-eyed about potential limitations, simply because of different histories, because of the history of mistrust, which again, well earned, and because in important ways we're very different countries with different interests and different outlooks.
And this is something also that you describe very well in your piece, is that India is actually quite a mighty country at the end of the day. You stress the point that it is the only country that can match China in terms of population, which you refer to as manpower. So we can see the implication here, but also in terms of a growing economy, of even what it means in terms of customership to have such a population, but also in technology, into the developments in engineering. So India is pretty much the only country in the region that can placate China, and Do you see this will part of it? Do you see India really willing to play that role?
Yeah, it's a good question. Um, Certainly, India is playing that role to a certain extent now. In part, India is reacting to China's very conscious decision to deepen its own influence in South Asia, in all of India's neighbors, and India, fears potential encirclement, and so India has responded to that by not just deepening ties with the United States, but with other U.S. allies and partners in the region. So we've seen the emergence of, the Quad dialogue. That's the U.S., India, Japan, and Australia, which is developing an increasing sort of security angle to it. We've seen a development in India-Taiwan relations. I think this is a conscious effort to, in part, due to China, what China is doing to India, and to act as a counterweight, to China in the region. Now, it's important that we have that counterweight. I think uh, I think that benefits U.S. interests and those of U.S. allies and partners. But India's, end objectives may not be quite the same as ours, and that's where we need to be careful in putting too much stock in what India may do here and may be willing to do.
The other thing that I should mention is the relations between India and the United States are going to improve anyway. One thing that is always critical in U.S. foreign policy, it has always been, is diaspora in the United States. Any country with a diaspora understands that diaspora is going to set U.S. foreign policy to some extent. Sometimes that is for better relations. I'm from Iran. Iranian diaspora is very active in pushing U.S. foreign policy toward more hostile toward the Islamic Republic. We have a sizable and very successful Indian diaspora here, and that is important in helping improve our relationship with India. In addition to this shared sense of threat that we have.
And Michael, you also mentioned something, yes, that I saw in your piece is the feeling by India that it may find itself kind of encircled, surrounded. You name not only China, but Pakistan and Sri Lanka and Nepal as countries where Chinese influence is significant and are potentially antagonistic towards India. So, can we talk a bit more about this? What is the role played by these other countries in the in India's calculations?
Pakistan is a bit of a different case from the others. Again, given the shared history here, given the partition 1947, and given that these two countries are essentially historical enemies and have been again since the late 40s. The India and Pakistan share territorial disputes. Pakistan is a sponsored terrorism against India, and so that is a unique relationship when we think about India's ties within South Asia, and across Asia in particular. Of course, Pakistan and China have invested significantly in their own ties. We've seen significant Chinese infrastructure investment. Pakistan is part of the Belt and Road Initiative. The two engage in defense cooperation. They've jointly developed a fighter aircraft. And so, India sees China lining up behind what is essentially, India's primary, mortal enemy. The other countries in the region, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan, they don't share that same sort of relationship with India as Pakistan does. And I think what they're doing is reasonable. They have always been slightly uncomfortable living next to, India, just because of its massive size, because by the nature of its size, it um, exerts significant influence on the smaller countries around it. And they've looked to China to help balance that out. Again, totally reasonable. China's motivations, though, are perhaps less benign, right? I think certainly China is hoping to peel India's neighbors away from it, and use those relationships to exert pressure on India at places and times of its choosing.
Now, let's circle back to Taiwan since this remains the center of our program. So, what does this all mean for Taiwan? Because Taiwan also has its own relationship with the United States and with other countries in the region, and has been also growing ties with India for obvious reasons. So, before entering into details, broadly, what do you both think that this dynamic between the India and the United States, this situational ally, situational partner relationship with the United States, what does that imply for Taiwan?
Yeah, look, on the whole, I think this is good for Taiwan, right? India and Taiwan do not share official diplomatic relations. India has a one China policy, which is somewhat similar to America's one China policy, but there's a long-standing unofficial relationship between India and Taiwan, and that relationship is deepening. From perspective of geopolitics, I think that Taiwan benefits from a strong India on China's southwest border, right? This prevents China from focusing too narrowly on Taiwan. It forces China to deploy resources to its western frontiers to defend itself against India. It stokes up Chinese attention. It leads to a diffusion of nuclear targets, right, away from the United States, because India is a nuclear power, which has been investing in capabilities which can strike Chinese targets. So this is all to the good. Um, I don't know that Taiwan wants to live in a world in which India is the primary hegemon in Asia, but we are at this point far away from that potentiality. I think where Taiwan needs to be careful is in ensuring that um, India is not using Taiwan in an instrumental fashion. And what I mean by that is, as Sino-India tensions rise, India may look to Taiwan as a means of punishing China. And while that may be useful to Taiwan in the short term, it's also not sustainable, because it means that should Sino-Indian relations stabilize, India may then withdraw its favor from Taiwan. We don't see that happening right now. It seems like the nature of the India-Taiwan relationship is, I should say that the means by which both countries are investing in that relationship are gradual, are sustainable, because they're focused on people-to-people ties and economic ties and financial investments, and can continue to grow. But again, I just think Taiwan needs to be on guard that it does not be used by India in a way that could put Taiwan in a difficult situation further on down the line.
One thing I just want to propose is improving relations between Taiwan and India depends a lot on the US relations with Taiwan. And without going so far as recognition, let me give you an example. Most Arab countries for decades did not and still do not have relations with Israel. But a lot of their diplomats and military attaches know each other, these Arab and Israeli attaches and diplomats, because they live in Washington, D.C. And that has been a secret channel of communication. Growing US relations with Taiwan could help a lot with this. You go to conferences in Washington, D.C., and very often there are Indian officers at these conferences. There is a way to bring in more Taiwanese to these. Not when I say bring in more Taiwanese, I don't mean from Taiwan. To improve relations in a way that there are Taiwanese officials, be it military attaches or diplomats, living in Washington, D.C. To more often, I know that Taiwan has a diplomatic office, but just expand that office and increase official relations between the U.S. and Taiwan.
And I had the opportunity to interview a few times some high-ranking or former high-ranking members of the Indian Armed Forces, and all of them told me the same thing. They say that they do not believe that China would attack Taiwan before it had a conflict with India first. They all say that China would want to put the Indian military out of the picture before they try something on Taiwan. This is something that you have heard or observed also.
So no, that's not something I've ever heard, I'm not sure that that's accurate. I certainly think China would seek to. I don't think China would move on Taiwan if it believed that the Indian military would either rush to Taiwan's defense, or take action in the Southwest to distract China to siphon off forces. I think that India can act as a important element of deterring China if it indicates, if it signals that it will not stand still. But I have not seen India making such moves. It seems unlikely to me at this point that India would be willing to offer Taiwan that kind of support. And so I don't think it's something which is a major concern of the People's Liberation Army at this point in time.
All right, another actor that we haven't discussed yet is Russia, because the relationship between India and Russia is also observed, commented a lot, and now we also hear Russia potentially cooperating with China against Taiwan. What can you tell us about the role that Russia plays in the equation in India's relationship with Taiwan and like-minded countries?
India has historically been much closer to the Soviet Union and than Russia. The relations remain warm. The one important aspect of this is India has a lot of Russian military equipment, so its military has been basically built on Russian equipment. For this reason alone, they need to, at least for the time being, maintain somewhat a close relationship. And having said this, the other side of it is also true that ideologically and for whatever other reason, India is just closer to uh, the Russians than pretty much any democracy that I can think of. Certainly more than any major large democracy, as large as India, certainly. Uh, so that has always been an issue. There are historical ties, there are historical close diplomatic relations, and that has been a point of friction in recent years since the Ukraine war in 2022, when most countries began reducing their reliance on Russia, but India still uh, maintains commercial ties, specifically energy and oil. This largely was kept quiet because of the interest that we share in Asia. The previous administration did not make this an issue, but the current administration has the president himself has lashed out on India for I quote financing Russia's war machine, and that relationship India had with Soviet Union was a problem through the Cold War, but since it was not really an issue because we did not really perceive in the United States Russia as a long-term enemy. Now that the attitudes have changed, this adds to the points of friction we have with India because our attitudes toward Russia have changed, but the Indian attitudes have not. And that was another thing we mentioned in our piece, that the Russia-Ukraine war has been framed as, and correctly, I would say, as a war between democracy and an autocracy, this ideological conflict. And the irony or paradox is that India is in Asia is on the side of democracies and is a democracy itself. But regarding Russia, it is siding with an autocracy. So there is also an ideological issue we have here with India, in addition to just strategic problem that we have regarding Ukraine.
Yeah, on the question of, Russia's role in East Asia, I think you're right that we have seen rhetorical Russian support for China's, positions on Taiwan. Also Japan in the wake of the recent China-Japan blow up over Prime Minister Takaichi's, frankly, very reasonable comments about Japanese security interests in the Taiwan Strait. We saw China and Russia do a joint, bomber patrol circling the Japanese islands. And so, Russia has and is playing a role in shaping the security environment in East Asia, in Northeast Asia. It is not, from an American perspective or Taiwan's perspective, a positive role. What to expect in the event of a crisis? Certainly moral support from Russia. Certainly, economic, industrial support, arms sales and shipments if China needs that from Russia going forward. I would not expect to see direct military engagement in a conflict in the Taiwan Strait or a conflict between China and Russia, just like we have not seen direct Chinese military engagement in Ukraine. But that doesn't mean that Russia can't cause a lot of problems. It can't complicate life for the United States and its allies and partners. Already today, I think just, Russian rhetorical support is helping China set the sort of the legal information conditions for moving against Taiwan, should it decide to do so at some point in the future.
To add one more thing, during the recent conflict between India and Pakistan, Indian jets, including I think French-made but also Russian-made jets, quite a few of them were shot down by Pakistani Chinese-made missiles. So that is also another point to consider as they review what went wrong in that conflict, the Indians, to see whether that was because of poor training of the pilots or because of low quality of the equipment. And if they conclude that it was the latter, that could be a point to convince the Indians that actually Russians are not reliable simply because their military technology is not reliable. If you're going to build up a military to fight the Chinese with, and you see that the Chinese missiles shoot down the equipment that you have, it is worth reconsidering whether you have the right equipment at all.
What you are saying here is very important, and that's why I asked the question, because there's a lot of rhetoric indeed, and a lot of words being thrown around here and there about what could happen and what it could mean, and they could possibly support each other, etc., etc. So it's good to hear something that is a bit more factual, And I was in a conversation at some point with someone who called BRICS an alliance, and I say, well, BRICS is actually not an alliance. So the person tell me, what is BRICS? I say, well, BRICS is an informal group of states. And they say, well, that's American propaganda. That's not facts. Where did you get that from? And I say, I got it from the BRICS website. The BRICS website says it's an informal group of states. But then when you see a lot of Chinese posts, they talk about it, about the BRICS alliance, etc. So what about BRICS in all of this? What is India doing in BRICS at the moment?
BRICS it's something to watch with a wary eye. It is not something for the United States and its allies and partners to panic about yet. Um, the first thing I'd say is so the BRICS countries, are Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. This is a pretty diverse group of countries with different histories from different regions, with different developmental stages, different interests. There's a lot that they don't share in common, and the group is now expanded to include 10 or 12 others. To me, the main concern is some of the economic moves are designed to, over time, challenge dollar dominance. I am skeptical that they can pull that off. Um, but again, it's something to keep a wary eye on. Uh, it's possible to think of India's role here in a couple different ways, and I don't think these things are mutually exclusive. So, because India has this committed, sort of non-aligned approach to foreign policy, it wants to be, or is interested in being in sort of a variety of different international clubs, if you want to put it that way. And so this is just one of them. Um, India by no means has sort of put all of its eggs in the BRICS basket. But this is a grouping of countries which is you could almost say constitutionally opposed to U.S. dominance of the international system, and so to that extent, they may be in there as a means of cooperating with other countries who share that opposition to U.S. dominance to seek out ways to dilute it. And from a U.S. point of view, that is not a good thing. On the other hand, when we look at that group of countries and those major five in particular, again, I think from a U.S. perspective, India and perhaps Brazil can act as something of spoilers. Um, they may be willing to go along with China and Russia to some extent in doing things like challenging dollar dominance, but they're not going to go all the way because they're not interested in a world in which China and Russia have the upper hand or they make the rules. And so, again, there are reasons to be concerned about the direction BRICS has taken, but there's also reason to be thankful um, that India and again I think Brazil are on the inside, perhaps exercising some effort to you know to hit the brakes or at least tap the brakes rather than going full speed ahead with countries which are effectively American enemies.
Another problem the BRICS have is they want to uh, challenge dollar, but also that is economically costly with them. And a lot of them are democracies who have to be responsive to the immediate economic concerns of their electorates. And that has also been a huge challenge for them and some sort of a safety valve for us.
All right, we are indeed reaching the end of our time. Michael and Shay, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having
Thanks.
us.
There is a lot of talk about how Taiwan's semiconductor industry could be relocated to the United States. Because this industry plays such an important role in national security, this creates a lot of anxiety. To see things more clearly, we talked with 3 industry actors who explained why they don't think it would be possible or even desirable for the United States to replace Taiwan.
My name is Aadil Brar. I'm an independent analyst based in Taipei.
My name is Chieh-ting Yeh. I am a venture investor in Silicon Valley and a director of US Taiwan Watch.
My name is White, and for now I'm working IT company named PTSC. I'm the CTO.
All 3 have observed firsthand the big difference in which the industry works in Taiwan and in the United States.
It's not necessarily that the people are different or that the work ethic is different. I don't necessarily believe that Americans cannot work as hard as the Taiwanese or vice versa, or there's anything specific about the culture. Rather, I think it's just that the business model of Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing is really built on the backs of the human factor, right? The labor force, right? And how much they contribute and how much they really sacrifice to make the ends meet and to create this business model that we have today, right? And so I think it is not only extremely difficult for Americans to do that. I don't even know if that's a good idea for Americans to replicate the kinds of business models that Taiwan is that currently exists in Taiwan. And I don't even know if that is the best idea for Taiwan to continue down this business model that has served Taiwan up until now.
Of course, USA is very rich, have a lot of money. But actually, the foundation of the Taiwan chip industry is not money, because it's founded from maybe more than many decades ago. And the key is Taiwan has the ecosystem, the supply chain ecosystem. If you can replicate the factory like TSMC to United States, but it's almost impossible to replicate all the supply chain end to end from Taiwan to United States.
The semiconductor industry in Taiwan is extremely specialized with many different parts of the supply chain based in Taiwan, which makes it easy for Taiwan to manufacture high-end semiconductors. You have highly trained talent with PhDs working around the clock to supply semiconductors, which are used for various purposes, including high-end fighter jets and defense systems, as well as cars and other things. It will be extremely difficult for US to replicate the supply chain because of the geography that US has and how things are spread out geographically speaking in the US versus Taiwan, where things are extremely close by and you can have engineers show up at the plant to fix things if they break. And to keep things going, it's easy for Taiwan to achieve that goal within this geography. And overall, that's why Taiwan has been extremely successful with the long-term output of the semiconductors. Even if the US manages to start producing low yield of the high-end semiconductors, actually reaching a high yield is the difficult part that Taiwan can achieve. But for the US to get there, it'll take a long time to reach that point. It's possible that the US starts clustering certain technologies within one geography around Arizona, and then they can reach the high yield of the semiconductor. But it will take quite some time to reach that goal.
The semiconductor industry is extremely important for American defense industries as well, which plays a role in this debate.
This is definitely a necessity, right? And so it is very understandable for every government to be able to say that they control or they can do these kind of sensitive, very essential things themselves and not to rely on other international partners. So I think that's completely understandable. Yet that if you define national security kind of narrowly, right? So things that are specifically for defense use, right? That is a very small part of just semiconductor manufacturing, right? There's a lot of other chips or other components that go into a lot of other things and a lot of the uses, right? And so I think again, if that is the only thing that we're talking about here, I think the conversation will be rather different. Right, we wouldn't be talking about replicating Taiwan's model per se, right? We would be talking about how does America or how does the United States be able to control those sensitive and highly essential strategic goods, right? At a reasonable enough price and at a reasonable enough setup, right? And not to say, well, we want to do exactly what the Taiwanese do, right? And I think there's kind of beyond the narrowly defined security needs, right? There's also this idea of reindustrializing the United States, and also perhaps a little bit more cynical to say, well, this type of business, the United States should be able to earn more market share from Taiwan as well, right? So I think that's kind of the background, I believe, the context which we talk about whether the United States can replicate Taiwan's manufacturing industry.
From the security perspective, Donald Trump as the president of the United States, they think to produce the chips in the United States is will be relative to the security, the national security of the United States. So they would like to replicate the chip manufacturer from Taiwan to United States. So to be honest, it's understood. My personal thing is really almost impossible to replicate all this type of large amount productivity from Taiwan to United States. So the small scale, yeah, it's possible to relocate some productivity to United States. Because we can understand why Donald Trump had this decision, that because he's the leader, the president of the United States, he needs to think about the national security stuff from the United States perspective. It's totally understandable.
The major implication for the US would be that they can achieve certain goals in terms of manufacturing semiconductors for its defense technologies, which is critical at the moment, as we've seen the supply chains for different technologies have been disrupted during COVID. And US wants to secure the supply chains through the manufacturing of semiconductors within its geography. And that is exactly the goal that I think the Trump administration is trying to achieve with the Silicon initiative that they have just launched. So it's part of a broad long-term strategy to make US self-sufficient in terms of its supply chain when it comes to the semiconductors. But again, as I said earlier, it will take a long time to reach a point where US becomes entirely self-sufficient and doesn't have to rely on other countries to manufacture these complex technologies, which will not be possible in the short term.
But it is unlikely that it would be possible or even a good option for the United States to own the entire supply chain alone. A more suitable evolution would be to organize the supply chain differently rather than completely absorb it.
In terms of Taiwan playing a role in the supply chain, it would still be contributing significantly to the high-end, know-how of how to manufacture these technologies, especially, lithography-related technologies. And so some of these technologies are actually made in Europe, but it's only Taiwan that can implement them in real time and achieve the kind of yield that's required to supply large manufacturers. And that kind of know-how is something that only Taiwan at the moment specializes in. And there are countries like Japan, South Korea that also want to learn from Taiwan to be able to replicate that process. And that is where the US will still need Taiwan. And this is because Taiwan has spent nearly 3 decades specializing in these processes, and they have continued to work on improving the technologies based on the changes that are happening in the technology sector, from simple iPhones to something more complex like submarines. So Taiwan has been following the lead in terms of how to tweak your manufacturing process, and that is where the US can use Taiwan and learn from Taiwan.
For example, the Google, they design the TPU, NVIDIA design the GPU, and Apple also design the chip over their iPhone. So United States will still own the best knowledge, best capability to design the best chip. And Taiwan will be still the manufacturing center. Yeah, so to really produce the chip based on the best design of United States. So from a perspective, the two-way collaboration will be very close, even though there will be some productivity relocate from Taiwan to the United States, but the two-side collaboration was still very close.
I remember talking to a retired semiconductor executive, right? And he said, there's all this talk about the United States wanting to get get into or get back into semiconductor manufacturing, right? And people talk about companies like UMC, TSMC, right? But at the end of the day, they're still just making things for American clients, right? So their profit margins are a lot smaller than the clients that order these chips, right? NVIDIA, Google, Apple, right? Even Intel, and right. So, if I had a magic wand, right, I would say, okay, maybe in the previous era of globalization, right, everybody is laser focused on efficiency, right? So that led to a very stark division of labor between different countries and different jurisdictions, right? So American companies purely do design, right? And then Taiwanese companies purely do manufacturing, right? And there are reasons why that's a good idea, right? The people who do design focus on design, and then they get really good at that without having to worry about other things, right? And the people who do manufacturing get really good at manufacturing, and they don't have to worry about other things, right? So, I think it's inevitable that gets reshuffled a little bit, right? So, for example, the national security part as narrowly defined, right? That gets made in the United States, right? But with collaboration and technology license from Taiwanese manufacturers, right? And at the same time, I think Taiwanese companies, right, or the Taiwanese economy, right, and this has been a thing that people in Taiwan have been talking about for years, right, which is how do you move up that value chain, right? So you're not just making things for other people, but you are, as a society, as an economy, right, there are also firms that do design. There are also firms that do consumer-facing products, right, and they're right, because I think again, Taiwan's success at the very least, just the semiconductor manufacturing sector, right, if not many other manufacturing sectors as well, right, is really built on the government relaxing some of these regulations, right, and then also really on the backs of the labor force, right, and so I think in the future there's going to be some reshuffling between two sides, and I think it really helps the resilience of both Taiwan and the United States if there could be more shared supply chain, right? So we're not just maximizing efficiency, but we're also building in resilience, redundancy, and also sort of a wider scope of options for the people in that society to kind of be at all levels of that value chain.
This, of course, is a big challenge for the years to come.
Taiwan has a difficult task ahead in terms of securing its own edge in the semiconductor business, and especially the kind of terms that President Trump is dictating at the moment puts Taiwan in a very tough spot. If even Taiwan wants to start manufacturing, let's say 1.9, 1.5 nanometer or 2 nanometer semiconductors in the US, it will not be a success in the short term because of the kind of specialization that Taiwan itself has. And Taiwan has to prove, first of all, how these processes work for something like a 1.5 nanometer, which is really a very new technology. And before it can prove how they can do things in Taiwan, it's only after that they'll be able to maybe replicate that in Japan and potentially in the US.
Other news around Taiwan this week. The United States has announced its largest ever arms sale to Taiwan, a potential $11.1 billion package including rocket systems, missiles, howitzers and drones. In domestic politics, the opposition Kuomintang and Taiwan People's Party have vowed to seek the impeachment of President Yeh Chieh-ting over his refusal to promulgate a revenue-sharing law passed by the legislature. And finally, Taiwan's central bank has sharply raised its forecast for 2025 GDP growth to 7.31%, citing a boom in AI-related semiconductor exports. We will meet again next weekend for more news about Taiwan and the world.